Welcome to the fourth lecture of Approaching Astrophysics, and this lecture is about stellar astrophysics. Next slide, please. So here we'll be seeing about some basic theoretical ideas and derivations of stellar equations and what to do with the observational data that we get from astrophysics. Next slide. So the structure of today's lecture would be first we'll introduce what is stellar astrophysics and what you're going to study here, and next we'll see at the basic equations of stellar structure, and in that within the topic we'll see hydrostatic equilibrium in stars, Fourier theorem for stars, energy transport, how they take place in stars, and convection. And then after that we'll see the relation between the stellar quantities that we get in these equations. Next slide. So traditionally, the stellar astronomy has been divided into two branches. The first being stellar interior, and the next being the stellar exterior or the stellar atmosphere. So you may wonder at what depth inside a star does the stellar atmosphere end and the stellar interior begin. So as it happens, the term stellar interior and stellar exterior do not correspond to anything physical meaning of exterior or interior. It has something to do with the scientific subjects which address two different sets of questions. So it appears from observational data that we'll discuss later that various quantities pertaining in stars have some relations amongst each other. For example, a very massive star usually has a very high luminosity and also a higher surface temperature. So to explain such observed relations or such observed observations, theoretically, we have to figure out the equations which should hold inside a star and then solve them to construct the model of stellar structure. Next slide. So yeah, so first let us go with the basic equations of stellar structure. So first one would be the hydrostatic equilibrium in the stars. So there is a little bit of derivation here, and so for that first let us consider let mr be the mass inside the radius r of a star, and the mass inside the radius r plus dr, where dr is a elementary length volume. Okay, so should be mr plus dmr, which means that dmr is the mass between r plus dr, the shell with the thickness dr. Okay, so if rho is a density at radius r, then the mass of shell would be rho multiplied with 4 pi r square into dr. Okay, implies that the mass dmr will be equal to 4 pi r square rho into dr. From this we get that dm by dr is equal to 4 pi r square rho. Next slide. So this would be, the equation which we saw would be the first basic equation in stellar astrophysics. Very important and very basic equation. So now let us consider a small portion of shell between R and R plus dr. Okay, if dA is the transverse area of this small element, the forces exerted by pressure acting on its inward and outward surfaces. So inward will have P into dA, and on the outward side will have P plus dP into dA. So by sign convention, because we are taking interior and exterior, it will be minus of P plus dP into dA. Okay, where P is the P and dP are the pressures at radii r and r plus dr. So the net force arising out of the pressure is minus dp by dA, because pressure is force by area. So this force should be balanced by the gravity. Okay, when we consider the star as an equilibrium condition. So the gravitational field at r is caused by the mass mr inside the radius r. So it is important to take the corresponding mass where we take the pressure, okay, at r. So the gravitational field at r is caused by the mass mr inside r, and it is equal to minus gm by r square, which is the gravitational field. Okay. So since the mass of the small element, okay, under consideration, that is rho dr into dA, the force balance condition will be dP dA is equal to gmm by r square, and here m will be rho dr into dA. So from this equating, I mean setting to the other side, we get dP by dr is equal to gmr by r square into rho. Gmr by r square is the field, and we are multiplying it with rho, that is m. Next slide. And one second, this is the second important uh, equation in stellar basic astrophysics. Next. So next we come to the Viral theorem for stars. We have seen Viral theorem. My friend has explained it in the previous lecture very briefly how it is done in astronomy. And here we consider a special case, that is how we apply it for getting the information in stars. So in ordinary stars like sun, okay, the inward gravitational pull is balanced by the excess pressure of the hot interior. Okay, so putting it in other terms, in formal definition, it is that the thermal energy of the interior balances the gravitational energy, or balances the gravitational power. We therefore expect the total thermal energy should be of the same order as the total gravitational energy, because we are considering very big values, so we are taking only the order of magnitudes. So it should be of the same order of the gravitational energy. So this can be established from the hydrostatic equilibrium equation. That is the second stellar equation which we have just derived. So in that equation, by multiplying on both sides with 4 pi r cube, okay, and then integrate it from the center to the outer radius r, we get this equation. It is just a small integration. And next slide, please. So this equation on the left hand side, it can be easily integrated by using, by using integration by parts, and I've done it here, so no need to see it very deeply. So by doing the integration, we get a total energy Eg is equal to 0 to r into that gravitational potential energy to the power 4 pi rho r square into dr. Next slide. So, from law of equipartition of energy, which we see in thermal physics, okay, we know that each particle or each degree of freedom gives 1 by 2 kBT of energy. So, here for a particle, it is 3 by 2 kBT of energy, because we are not considering vibrational and other very minute particles of the kinetic energy. So it is 3 by 2 kBT is the mean energy of thermal motion per particle in a region of temperature T, and hence 3 by 2 N kBT is the thermal energy, total thermal energy, if we consider N number of particles. So per unit volume, the total thermal energy will get by integrating it again, and when we integrate it, we get this form of the equation, that is 2 into Et plus Eg is equal to 0. This very famous result is known as the Viral theorem equation for stars. This can also be written as, when we send it to the other side, it comes to be Et is equal to minus half into G, and if we want to take only the magnitude, we can just take that is equal to 1 by 2 of Eg. That is, Et is the thermal energy and Eg is the gravitational energy. Next step. So now we come to the energy transport inside stars. Okay. So the energy generated by nuclear reactions, we know there are many nuclear reactions happening in the stars, and this will be explained in the next lecture or next part of the lecture. So these energy that is regulated due to the various nuclear reactions in the central region of the star is transported outward. Okay. Now we shall see how the energy is transported to the outer. Okay, we have to now derive the equations which describe this process of transfer. So for that, let us first consider Lr to be the total amount of energy flux per unit time, which flows which flows outward across the spherical surface of radius r inside the star. This is similar to what we do in calculating the electric flux in electromagnetism, the first electrostatics. So this process or this derivation is a very common thing that we have seen in lower classes. So we expect Lr to be equal to the luminosity L of the star at the outer radius R is equal to R. So in the first lecture, describe what is the luminosity that we see, and that luminosity is equal to the uh, luminosity that is existing at the outer surface of the sun. That is what we see from Earth. So If we consider epsilon to be the rate of energy generated per mass per unit volume, then we'll obtain that dLr is equal to 4 pi r square dr into rho into the energy generated, that is epsilon. From this we get that dLr by dr is equal to 4 pi r square uh, rho into epsilon. I think that dr shouldn't be here. So that is the rate of change of luminosity, how it changes with respect to variation in r. So this is the equation which described it, and this is the third most important equation of four with that we are going to see in stellar equations. So this is one of the basic stellar equations. So next slide. So convection inside the stars. So we have seen how the radiation works, and hello.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so convection inside stars. So in radioactive transfer, energy is transported without any material motion, as we know, we have seen also. So in radiative transfer, we don't see the body itself moving to transfer the energy. But what happens in convection is the body that is carrying the energy moves forward or upward in any direction, and it correspondingly transfers the energy. So let us next slide. So suppose we have a perfect gas in hydrostatic equilibrium inside a star. Okay. So now we consider a blob of gas which has been displaced vertically upward as shown in the figure you can see here. And initially the blob of gas had the same density rho and the same pressure P as the surrounding, because it is in the equilibrium and it should be the same with respect to the atmosphere outside. And the external gas density and pressure at the new position of the blob, that is the upward on the upward direction, are rho dash and P dash. Let us consider this to be the new pressure. Okay. So we know that the pressure imbalances in a gas are quickly removed by acoustic waves. If there are imbalances, so they are quickly removed by causing the equilibrium. But heat exchange is not so spontaneous as there is equilibrium, okay, in pressure. So pressure is equally, I mean, pressure balances, but the heat doesn't. It takes time to be transferred in convection. So it is not reasonable. I mean, it can be, we can consider the blob to have been displaced adiabatically and to have the same pressure P dash as the surroundings in the new position. So because the heat is not changing spontaneously and it takes a very long time to get into it, so we are considering the process to be adiabatic, that is without any change in the heat. Okay, so let rho star be its density in the new position, and if we take the case that rho star is less than rho dash, the density in the new position, then the displayed blob will be buoyant and will continue to move up further away from its initial position, making the system unstable and giving rise again to convection because it is carrying the energy with it. On the other hand, in case 2, if we consider rho star, okay, to be greater than rho dash, then the blob will try to return to its original position so that the system will be stable and be there. I mean, and there will be no convection in this case. So all this is happening only for the system to be in equilibrium position and to be stable. That is with the least energy. Stability corresponds to least energy, of course, as we all know. So convection is of the nature of instability of the system. So to find the condition for conjugative instability, we have to determine whether rho star is greater or less than rho dash, so that we can determine which of these two cases is applicable in this here. Next slide. So we have assumed that the blob has been displaced adiabatically, that is delta Q is equal to 0. So it follows that rho star is equal to rho into P dash divided by P to the power 1 by gamma. This is the common equation that we use in adiabatic equations in thermal physics. So if dP by dr is the pressure gradient in the atmosphere, that is how the pressure changes with change in with variation in R. Then we can substitute that P dash is equal to P plus dP by dr into delta R, and by this we get an binomial expression, which when we expand and we take away the insignificant terms, we get rho star is equal to rho plus rho by gamma into p dp by dr into delta r. On the other hand, rho dash is also equal to rho plus d rho by dr into delta r. So using that, rho is equal to P by RT, as we consider the gas to be an ideal gas. This is applicable. So we get the below equation, that is rho dash is equal to rho plus rho by T dP by dr into delta R minus rho by T dt by dr into delta R. So here d rho by dr and dt by dr are the density and temperature gradients in the atmosphere. That is how the density and temperature vary when there is a variation in R. And so from these two above equations, we get that. Next slide, please. So from these two equations, we get that rho star minus rho dash is equal to minus of 1 minus 1 by gamma rho by p dP by dr plus rho by t dt by dr into rho r. We are just clubbing those two equations which we have derived before, and from that we give when we take only the magnitude, we get the dt by dr, that is the temperature gradient or how the temperature varies with r, is less than 1 by 1 minus 1 by gamma into T by P and the magnitude of the pressure gradient. Okay, this is known as the Schwarzschild stability conditions, which is a very famous condition in astronomy, uh, specifically speaking in stellar astrophysics. Next slide. So the equation which we saw just now is the fourth equation, and with this we complete. I mean, we have seen the four basic equations that are used in stellar astronomy. Okay, so basic equations. There are more, but these are the very basic and important equations that we use. So next we come to the relations between the quantities which we have derived now. So from the stellar structure equations, that are the four equations, we shall try to extract some relations among the various quantities pertaining to a star. So from the second basic stellar equation, we that is the also called as the hydrostatic equation, we replace the LHS by minus P by R, and correspondingly we should replace the M by R square. Okay. Then we get that P is directly proportional to M by R square into rho. So taking so that means that rho is directly proportional to 1 by r cube, which we got from the first equation, and this would imply this would imply that P is directly proportional to M by r cube into T. Okay, and which implies that the temperature is directly proportional to mass of the star, and it is inversely proportional to the radius. Next slide. So going on, we substitute this value in equation number 2, then we get that luminosity L is directly proportional to ER whole to the power 4 and divided by M, which means that, I mean, again, if we substitute, ER corresponds to, is directly proportional to M, and so from this we get that M to the power 4 by M. So luminosity is directly proportional to mass to the power 3. So this is how luminosity is related to mass. So by this, the first part is completed, and I hand it over to Achyut. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you, Roshan. I'll be continuing the second part of this lecture, stellar astrophysics. So in previous lecture, we arrived at some theoretical conclusions about various quantities that we deal with stellar structures and all. But like Are these conclusions born out of observational data? So in coming minute, few time, we will find out. Next slide. So like first is like we will determination of stellar parameters. Like for any star which is not too faint, we can take the spectrum of those stars, and by matching those spectrums, we can find out various quantities such as like temperature or its composition and extra. Then afterwards, we will determine like how we can do it with for a nearby star and a binary systems of stars. Next slide. Yeah. So first is surface temperature, how we determine it. So in the previous lecture, we applied thermal physics in astronomy and astrophysics, and we came out with the conclusion that star surface acts as a black body radiation. And we also know that the radiation coming out from black body is known as spectral lines. So if we relate the star spectrum to a black body spectrum, then we would be able to find out the surface temperature of star, which we denote it as T effective. Also the quantity BV, which is as in blue and visual bands. Like these are the bands which we as the measure of star's color. So one of the easy things to measure of a star is its apparent magnitude. Okay. So like T effective also helps to determine the peak of spectrum and thereby determines the color of the star. So what do we get is like the hotter the star is, it will be bluish in color, and if colder the star, it would be in reddish in color. Like the hotter, the high temperature of star, it would be emitting UV rays or ultraviolet rays, and the colder the star, it would be emitting infrared rays. Next slide. Now the second thing that we observe is composition. So now composition of a star could be determined from its spectral lines, but it is not that easy. Like for example, hydrogen. If we take an example of hydrogen, we all know like the basic material of a star is like composed of hydrogen, but we do not find hydrogen in all the states. Like if a temperature of a star is very high, so like the hydrogen present will be ionized, and if it's ionized, we can't get it in the spectrum lines. Also if it's very cold, then the energy state, it would be less than 2, like n is equal to 1 if it's cold. So then also it should be an excited state in order to get it into the spectral line. So we need an intermediate temperature, like from the state from n to 4. So if temperature is in that state, we could get the spectral lines. So this was a contradiction which Saha realized, and he said in 1921, all spectral lines do not account for the composition of the star. So he came up with the theory of thermal ionization, provided a satisfactory explanation why spectra of stars with different surface temperatures look different. Next slide. So now we come is like, if we now we know like different composition will have different spectrals lines in different temperatures. So how we classify the stellar spectra. So E.C. Pickering in I don't know about like 1800s, he developed the scheme of classifying stellar spectra in which a particular type of spectrum would be denoted by a Roman letter. So these spectral classes in the order of progressively decreasing surface are O, B, A, F, G, K, M. So like we know how we physicists are, and like how the only thing we lack are in this thing. So they made a mnemonic displaying their sadness of how we can remember it. Oh, be a fine girl, kiss me. Okay, so this is how we can uh, st- uh, uh, classify the spectral classes in decreasing surface temperature. Next slide. So now, like we know, so now what we concluded is like the spectral lines like depend from these spectrum we can find out the temperature, but it is not that helpful in the composition of the material of the star. Okay. So now the question is how we can analyze the composition of a star with the spectral lines, or how it could be. So we will find out that. Now the next is nearby stars, like how we measure the distance and luminosity, okay, for nearby stars. So like if a star is within a few parsecs, we can determine the distance of a star from a measurements parallax. This method we have done in like our first lecture. So once the distance to the star is known, we can find the absolute magnitude in any band by applying this relation we have done in the previous lecture. So the band is like the absolute magnitude in the V band. V band is known as the visual band. Okay, so it is known as absolute visual magnitude and is denoted by M subscript V, and it is a measure of energy of star giving out visible light. So now if we like take example of our sun. So a sun is giving most of its energy in the form of visible light, but the stars which are at higher temperatures, so the energy, the band they are giving are infrared. Okay, hence, so MV is not a complete estimate of the total luminosity of the star. So what we can do is, like, we could measure all the wavelengths, we could take the values of all the wavelengths of that stars radiation, and we could combine it and then calculate absolute magnitude from that, and that would be called as absolute bolometric magnitude, and it is denoted by M subscript BOL. Next slide. So now we'll talk about binary stars. Like binary stars are like a group of stars, so we will determine how we can calculate their mass. So as we all know, like, one fundamental mass is the one of the fundamental parameters. So it could be very easy. It could be estimated by the gravitation attraction it produces. Now in binary stars, the stars are in together. So if if we want to calculate the mass, we could observe the gravitational force between them, and from that we could calculate the mass. So now, if one star is much dimmer than the other, so it will obviously block the lights coming from the brighter star. So then we could observe a periodic variation of brightness. Such binaries, such star binaries are known as eclipsing binaries. Okay. So as two stars in binary system move around their common center of gravity, so one star may sometimes be moving towards us and one would be moving backwards. So that gives a rise to Doppler shift. And that Doppler shift will give variation in spectral lines. So that binaries are known as spectroscopic binaries. Once the binary period and the velocities of companions are known, it is straightforward to apply Newtonian gravitational mechanics to calculate the mass of two companions. Next slide. So now, like, what do we infer from these observational data, like the mass, the temperature, the composition? So now we will see those things. Next slide. So the first thing that the first feature is mass luminosity relationship. So like if we take a situation like a star is nearby star and a binary, then both of its luminosity and mass can be determined. Plotting luminosities and mass of such stars, we will get this image, a straight line. And this we could have calculated as told by my friend Roshan by the relation the luminosity is directly proportional to MQ. So this is the reason like why we are getting a straight line. So yeah. Now, if we see this figure, like there are different symbols, so correspond to different types of binaries. So I haven't mentioned, but I'll tell you, like the binaries which are measured, like shown by cross, are like visual binaries, and the spectroscopic binaries are by open squares. Okay. Yeah. Next slide. Another important features are the HR diagram. So HR diagrams are nothing but like a diagram between the temperature and luminosity. Okay. So as we pointed, so now in this diagram, it is a HR diagram between the BV band and the absolute magnitude MV. So like it may be noted that the quantities plotted on the axis are a BV and absolute magnitude, which are directly measured from T effective and luminosity. We can infer like before relations, and we have shown. So stars that are lying on the right, you know, right side of the diagram are reddish in color. Okay, and the whereas the stars lying on the left side are bluish in color. So like most of the stars, as we can see, like there's a dense, are located in, there's a dense structure in like in a straight line. Like if you draw a median, we could get a median of it. So like we could conclude that most of the stars are in this uh, area. So that area we call it as this diagonal strip, or we can say we call it as main sequence. Now in the next topic we'll discuss about the stars. As we can see, there are some stars which are outside the main sequence also. So like if we consider a median curve passing through, as I told, through the points on the main sequence, it will give us a relation between the BV and MV. And we have already discussed that MV apparent magnitude is further related to effective temperature and bolometric magnitude. Next slide. In this table shows how these various quantities are related for stars lying on a main sequence. And the next, as we can see, yeah, next slide. So now this figure shows us the relationship between bolometric magnitude and effective temperature for main sequence stars. Okay, in main sequence stars, and it is, and we have calculated this graph from the last two columns of a previous table. Okay, and what we have now, what we can observe is a clear straight line, and it is a good fit. This straight line corresponds to scaling relation. L is directly proportional to n power n time the effective temperature, where n we have taken it as a crude approximation as 5.6. Next slide. Now, like all, as we have seen, like although most of the data points in the previous HR diagram, they all lied on a diagonal strip called the main sequence. But there were also many points or stars, or we can say, that were on the upper right corner and the lower left corner. Okay, so the data points in the upper right corner corresponds to stars which are red in color and have luminosities much larger than the luminosities of the stars present on the main sequence. And now what the thing is, like, since the if we consider like the unit areas of all the stars with same surface temperature give out energy at approximately at the same rate, like Stephen Boltzmann law, okay, of surface emission from black bodies, the stars in the upper right corner have to be much larger in its size, because as it is, T is directly proportional to the mass, we as told by Roshan. So like if they are much if their luminosity is much larger, so direct, so it shows us that their mass should be also larger. So and it should be more luminous. So these stars that on this upper right corner of the diagram are called red giant. And we can also see the stars lying in the lower left corner of the HR diagram are bluish white in color and have much smaller luminosities compared to the blue stars on the main sequence. So these stars on the left corner of the HR diagram are known as white dwarfs. Okay. Next slide. So yeah, now like we have already provided a theoretical explanation of the main sequence, and we know that more luminous stars are more massive. So the upper left corner of the main sequence corresponds to more massive stars and lower right to the less massive stars. So the mass of a star determines at which point the main sequence of the star would lie. The main sequence is essentially a sequence, we can say, of stellar masses with the mass increasing from light to left corner to the upper corner. Okay. So yeah. So now is like the end of the main sequence, like when like a continuous mass limit ends, and what is the limit of the mass. So like if we see the lighter stars on the main sequence at the lower right corner of the HR diagram have masses of the order zero point 0.1 solar mass. Okay, whereas the most massive stars at the upper left corner have masses of order 100 solar masses. Now the thing is like we know we know stars, they it is the order of stars present on main sequence, like lower limit is zero point 0.1 solar mass and the upper limit is 100 solar mass. But in our HR diagram, like we have seen, there were stars which were had more luminosity, that is large number of masses. So like why we have considered like these limits only. So now we will find out like what is the lower limit. So like we know like star forms out of the gravitational collapse of interstellar clouds. And like when a newly forming protostar shrinks gravitationally, it should hold and protostar should become hotter while it shrinks. Now, eventually its interior may be hot enough for nuclear reactions to start, causing the gravitation contraction to halt in order. So it will balance it. But the mass of the protostar is less than the lower limit that we have discussed as 0.1 solar mass. So what happens is like it won't run nuclear reactions inside. So once it won't run nuclear reactions, so the temperature could not be become special high, and it would continue, and the gravitational force would be dominating, and that we call it as brown dwarf. Now, like detailed theoretical calculations, 0.08 molar solar mass is the lower limit for the mass of a star generating energy by nuclear reactions. Now, let us now turn our attention to very massive stars with very high temperature inside. So the radiation pressure becomes more important, like massive inside the massive stars. So eventually, the very high radiation pressure inside a massive star can make the star unstable. It is straightforward to show that a high radiation pressure can lift the outer layers of the star. Like the pressure would be so much, like after at a point of time, it would lift off the layers of a star. Okay. Yeah. Next slide. So what we do is we take the luminosity of a star to be L and radius R, and psi be the opacity, and the product of the density and psi is the absorption coefficient, and the energy absorbed per unit volume per unit time is psi x L by 4 pi R square. Okay, so now the momentum associated with this energy can be obtained by if we divide this energy absorbed per unit volume per unit time expression by C, which, and it will give us the momentum, which is nothing but the force exerted on this unit volume. Now the star will be able to hold on it to its outer layer of gas only if the inward force of gravity is stronger than the force exerted by the radiation. Okay. So that so from that this we get this relation Gm by R square rho is great should be greater than this momentum. So now from this what we get is the limit of a luminosity. Like it should be less than this value 4 pi c Gm by psi. Next slide. So this like limit of luminosity is known as Eddington luminosity limit. We must note that the radius R was cancelled out from the previous expression. So like since we have approximate relation that L goes as mq, we can write L is equal to lambda mq. It then follows from the above equation that the Eddington limit will be violated if the mass of the star were to be larger than this m max. So what this means, like a star could not have a mass greater than this. Okay, this is the limit of the biggest stars that we know. So so while mmax given above may be an absolute upper limit beyond which a star's outer layer would be blown off by radiation, in reality stars with mass considerably less than mx become unstable due to radiation and are not able to exist. So now what happens is like if we have masses more than this mx, so automatically we know it is directly proportional to luminosity. So luminosity will also increase. So so these things what we see, we call them as pulsars, quasars, or gamma ray bursts. So these are the astrophysical like events which have mass is more than this m max, like more than this luminosity limit. Yeah, next slide. So now, like when we did HR diagrams for a star and binary stars also. Now, what we'll do, we'll calculate the HR diagrams for a cluster of stars. So, like there are two types of cluster. Like in some of the clusters, the stars are loosely bound, having few stars. So such stars are known as open clusters. And there are star clusters in which stars are tightly packed, and it may be of order 10 raised to power 5. So these are known as globular structures. Now, for our sake, like from physics point of view, we are globular cluster is more important to us, because we can believe that if they are tightly packed, so they are born at the same time, and are roughly at the same distance from us. So okay, if they are tightly packed, so their distances could be neglected. We can consider it as a one system. Next slide. So now, if all the stars in a cluster are at same distance d, then the difference between absolute magnitude and apparent magnitude will be same for all the stars. Yeah. So hence we can construct the HR diagram for a star cluster by plotting apparent magnitude instead against BV. Okay, like this is the visual, as we know, like BV is the visual band. So now by using the relation this, we can easily find the distance d. So now what it yields such values, like it like if you see the overall appearance, so is quite different like from the one we did for binary stars, the HR diagram, like it is quite different. So like in that previous HR diagram we found like the BV sequence for that HR diagram or for those stars was 0, but here as we can see it's 0.3. So what we know that main sequence stars with lower values of BV correspond to more massive stars, like more big stars, like more mass. So like it is like why it happens. So like we will see now why it is like this. So now before we discuss like if a more bigger star, if higher the mass of the star, it will use its nuclear fuel more rapidly, and so its lifetime will be less. Okay, so in a globular cluster of a certain star heavier than a particular mass would have finished their lives on the main sequence. So like we would see in the next lecture, nucleosynthesis, like as long as hydrogen is converted to helium, so like star would be remain in a main sequence. So like we will study like how it happens. Now after a star becomes a red giant as a result of inflation of outer layers, so we see that there is a branch of stars proceeding towards the region of red stars, like upper right corner. We see like there are stars going to the upper right corner from the place where main sequence ends abruptly. So what we can presume, next slide we can go on to the next slide. Now what we, next slide, Google, I went forward, I forgot. Yeah. So like what we can presume is like there are like the stars are in a state of transition from the main sequence to a red giant phase. And now since these transitions takes relatively less time compared to lifetime of stars, the probability of coming across stars in this transitory phase is not very high in random sample of stars. So that is why we see relatively few stars between main sequence and red giant phase in the HR diagram. After finishing the red giant phase, the star may proceed towards becoming a white dwarf. So why it is like so? Like if it has more mass, the more will be its luminosity, and if more is the luminosity, it will burn its nuclear fuel more, and it would a time would come, there would be no energy, no nuclear fuel for it to radiate the energy. So the gravitational force acting on it would dominate, and it would again become a white dwarf, as we discussed earlier. So, like now, from a theoretical estimate of lifetime of stars, one can determine the age of a globular cluster, simply by noting the turning point of the main sequence. So, like as it turned up to upper right corner, no. So, what we can say, like if their mass increased, so up to that point where it ended abruptly, so from that we could measure the age of the globular cluster. So the vertical axis displays the absolute magnitude, which can be found easily after determining the distance of the cluster by matching the main sequence. So the clusters with turning points lower down are clearly older. Next slide. So here in this diagram, we can see like number of clusters. So as we have discussed earlier, the clusters whose point, like turning point, is lower, as we can see. So they will be much older because they convert those stars convert into red giant phase very earlier as compared to the other clusters. So from that we could measure like how old a globular cluster be. So now the detailed through detailed theoretical calculations suggest that the oldest globular clusters are about 1.5 into 10 to the power 10-year old. Like which poses a serious question, like age of as you know, like the age of the universe was like about 13 or 14 billion years old. So how could it be less than the age of the oldest stars? Because stars were formed after the big bang, so how stars could be older? So like there are so what it may indicate for like cosmologists and astrophysicists, like either the big bang theory is wrong, or what we can do, we can modify our GTR, general theory of relativity, or like like what we need to do, we could come up with the new theory of stellar evolution. But many cosmologists and astrophysicists believe that with coming time, like the sources, like how we measure these things would improve, like with the technology. So we could clear this contradiction. So yes, I can also have your views on this, like how could it be done? Yeah, that's it. Thank you.